Alrighty, if everybody in the crowd could quiet down and take their seats if there are any, and we'll bring the meeting of the Public Safety, Crime Prevention Policy Finance Committee to order and start out with a roll call.
Representative Cornish.
Here.
Representative Johnson.
Here.
Representative Considine.
Here.
Representative Dean.
Here.
Representative Hertos.
Here.
Representative Hillstrom.
Here.
Representative Howe.
Here.
Representative Lomer. Representative Lucero.
Here.
Representative Newberger. Representative O'Neill.
Here.
Representative Quam. Representative Rosenthal.
Here.
Representative Schoen. Representative Ward. Representative Winkler.
Here.
And Representative Zerwas.
Okay, Representative Considine, would you move the minutes of April 9th?
So moved.
Okay, Representative Considine moves the minutes of April 9th. All approved? All right.
All those in favor?
I thought I was moving too fast here. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right. I'll give you kind of a diagram, folks, of what we're going to do today. First of all, I'll do the House file for the Omnibus bill from my chair here. And what we'll do is we'll start out with a author's amendment to get adopted, and then we'll go into a review of the spreadsheet by our fiscal analyst. And when we're done with that, we'll do a run through with staff on the policy. And when we're done there, then we'll address amendments one by one. We're not going to be taking any public testimony at all today except on provisions of the bill that we haven't heard yet. If there's anything that we haven't heard. Other than that, that's the only public testimony we'll take. I don't envision being here a long time. We don't plan on introducing any new testimony or justification for any of the items we have in the bill. However, we'll naturally give you folks as long as you want on comments or questions or anything you want. We got the room until midnight. And we might have to recess at various times because members are running all over to different committees like this one. And so however long it takes, we're ready for, but I don't envision it. I've tried to fashion this bill hopefully very generously towards the DFL so they would like it. Historically, we've got more money and more policy in here for the opposing party, I think, than we have had in a number of sessions. And we did take everything, of course, and when we're going to take some amendments and not others, but we'll work our way through and hopefully be done here in a time. Representative Hillstrom, anything you want to know before we start?
Mr. Chair, just in the event we have questions from the commissioners, will we be allowed to ask them?
If you have direct questions for the commissioners, or somebody on something here, but I'd rather not have just a question, how does this affect you? Because I've already told everybody there's no public testimony, and then one commissioner will have the advantage and the other one won't. But if there's something really confusing we need clarification from, I suppose we could.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Not just their reaction to how they feel about it, preferably. Okay. Are we ready? Okay, the chair will move House File 849 to be recommended to pass and referred to Ways and Means Committee. And we'll start out with a overview of the spreadsheet by our fiscal analyst. Oh, wait, that's right. We were going to adopt the amendment because there's changes made to the spreadsheet that are what we'll do is that I'd move the amendment DE2 to get the bill in shape that the author would like. And all in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? No. Okay, and then the author's amendment A12. In the explanation of this, there is some mistakes and or not mistakes, but things that we noticed in the budget sheet that didn't balance out. There's nothing material that changes the overall figure, but, line 10.6 of the DE2, we need to change from 22,261,000 to 23,261,000 armored debt service. And could we incorporate that amendment into the A12 amendment?
Mr. Chair, if we could hear what you actually said. I didn't hear what you.
John, you want to tell me what? Or Mr. Walsh?
Mr. Chair and members, I was contacted this morning by the Department of Public Safety that on the DE2 amendment, page 10, line 10.6, the rider for armored debt service, there's a number that's incorrect. Instead of 22,261,000, that number should be 23,261,000 to reflect the correct amount of debt service to be paid.
And so I would just attempt to incorporate that amendment into the A12 authors amendment.
I have no objection to that, Mr. Chair.
Okay, you folks have heard the motion, the A12 amendment as amended. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Now we're ready. Okay, now we're ready for our fiscal analyst, Mr. Walsh, to give us a run-through on the spreadsheet. Everybody got one in your packet with you? Okay.
Mr. Chair and members, you should have a spreadsheet in your packets. This may differ slightly from a version you had prior. There were some typos and spelling errors corrected, a couple technical changes, and it should reflect the amendments that we just adopted. So, Mr. Chair, I'll begin on page 1 of the spreadsheet. For the Supreme Court, the governor had included enough funding for a 5% and 5% increase for the 2 years of the biennium for the Supreme Court. Because of the lower target, the House position reflects a 1.5 and 1.5% increase for salaries, as well as additional money for insurance and benefit increases that the Supreme Court requested. On line 17, the Civil Legal Services through the governor's budget had requested $1,034,000 to increase their general services, and the House position provides $500,000, or roughly half of that requested increase. Moving down to the Court of Appeals, again, the governor had provided a 5 and 5 for salaries, and the House position, or the DE3, includes a 1.5 and 1.5, plus additional money for insurance and benefit increases. Moving down to line 33, the district courts. Again, we are at a 1.5 and 1.5% increase for fiscal 16 and 17 for salary increases, as well as including the amount of money they had requested for insurance and ancillary benefits. The district courts had requested juror mileage rate reimbursement increases and a per diem increase. The House position did not have money to fund those two requests. However, a placeholder was put in, which was House File 1180, additional specialty court funding, and there's $50,000 each year for that request. And members, I'll just be highlighting differences between the original requests that were in the governor's budget and the House position. Mr. Chair, moving on to the top of page 2, the Guardian Ad Litem Board. The Guardian Ad Litem had undertaken a policy of putting contract employees onto full-time state employee model, and this had created a shortfall. They had requested $1 million a year to fund that shortfall. That was provided in the governor's budget, is provided here as well. They had asked for a salary supplement of 1.8% and insurance increases. Those were provided. However, the target was insufficient to provide for money for the pay equity that was requested, and this would be for the employees that they hired from contract employees to full-time employees. were not brought up to an equitable level for people that had been state employees for the amount of time that they had served, and so the pay equity portion of their request was not funded. And the Guardian Ad Litem Board will have to decide how they deal with that deficiency. Mr. Chair, moving on to the tax court, we are at the governor's level, except for one small item. The tax court had requested one additional law clerk. That was not funded in the House position. Under the Uniform Laws position, or commission, we are at the same position as the governor, providing the additional funding for increased dues and travel costs. The Board of Judicial Standards, we are the same as the governor, adding the additional part-time staff or half FTE for $30,000. Moving down to line 85 for the Public Defense Board, the Board of Public Defense had requested an additional 41 attorneys. The House position provides half of that request, or 20.5 FTEs, and an additional $3.6 million. We also fund their compensation and insurance requests at the governor's level. Mr. Chair, that takes us to the top of page 3. The Department of Public Safety for Homeland Security and Emergency Management. Our major differences are on line 107. The Department of Public Safety had requested money for a state-only disaster records management system, some additional upfront money, and ongoing costs of 2 FTEs. The House provided money for 1 FTE, or roughly subtracted $144,000 from each year of the department's request. Under line 108, the disaster contingency account, the governor, in his supplemental budget request, had supplied $11 million to that request. The House puts $2.5 million into the contingency account. On line 109, the department, or the House, had inserted $25,000 for anti-terror ISIS or Al-Shabaab recruitment, and I have been requested by a member to change the title from ISIS to ISIL, and this will be done on future versions of the spreadsheet. Mr. Chair, on line 112, there is a line for House File 800, Chemical Assessment and Emergency Response. This is to take money from the fire safety account and provide additional money to the chemical assessment teams. Mr. Chair, moving down to line 119, the Bureau of Criminal Apprehension. The BCA had requests for several additions to their budget, and in all cases, the House was able to provide less funding. In most cases, it's about half of their request, or a few fewer FTEs. For latent fingerprint examiners on line 124, the governor's bill provides 5. The House provides 2 additional fingerprint examiners for, I thought that was mitochondrial DNA. The House provides 2, or excuse me, the governor provides 2 additional examiners. The House provides 1. For equipment replacement, they had asked for $800,000 additional per year. They were granted $400,000. For supplies, $350,000 was requested. The House provides $175,000. A new digital forensics unit, they had requested 9 FTEs. The House provides 4.5, although that phases in the second year. They had requested additional 5 FTEs for a financial crimes unit. The House provides 2.5 FTEs. They were requesting 13 additional positions for a predatory crimes unit. The House provides half, or 6.5 FTEs. The governor had requested $911,000 for live scan machine replacements throughout the state. The House provides $650,000 per year. And again, their salary and insurance money at a 1.8% percent increase rate that the governor requested was provided by the House position. Mr. Chair, moving on to Fire Marshal. The House provides the salary and insurance request asked for by the governor. However, it's in a different form displayed on the sheet. The House position includes the increases requested by the Fire Marshal and the board in House File 800. So there is a firefighter training increase of 4.673 million the first year, 3.345 the second year goes to the Board of Firefighter Training. $75,000 of this is a one-time increase and is decreased in the tails. The State Fire Marshal, their salary and increase as well as additional increases provided on line 147. On 148, there's 2.2 million in fiscal year 16 and 1.2 in fiscal year 17 provided to Task Force 1. Some additional money in the first year is provided, I believe, for equipment. And on line 149, a new appropriation for the Minnesota Air Rescue Team of $190,000 per year is provided on that line. Mr. Chair, that takes us to page 4. For gambling and alcohol enforcement, we are at the governor's request level. On line 165 for the Office of Justice Programs, the House position provides the money on line 168 for salary and insurance. It also includes House File 425, a placeholder for Crime Victim Services Grants addition. On line 170, House File 503, a $50,000 per year placeholder for child advocacy centers. On line 171, House File 755, prosecutor law enforcement training program, $100,000 per year placeholder. On line 172, House File 1776, sex trafficking prevention grants, $250,000 per year. On line 173, House File 1500, a crime victim support grants placeholder at $50,000 per year. Mr. Chair, that brings us down to emergency communication networks on 179. We are the same as the governors and provide for the requests of the agency. Mr. Chair, that brings us to page 5 of the spreadsheet. The Post Board, on line 204, we provide the governor's request for salary and insurance increases. And on line 205, provide an additional $100,000 per year. For House File 406, this is de-escalation training grants, primarily veteran de-escalation training grants at $100,000 per year. Mr. Chair, we are the same on line 212 as the governor on the Private Detectives Board, which brings us to the Department of Corrections. On line 225, we provide the money for salary and insurance, the 1.8 requested by the agency. There's no money on line 227 for the governor's request to switch kitchen workers at several DOC facilities from contract employees to state employees. On lines 229 and 230, there is no funding for the electronic health record or the 24-hour coverage at 3 additional facilities. This would be 24-hour nursing coverage at 3 additional correctional facilities. Again, that money was not provided. On line 231, the Fugitive Apprehension Unit, the governor had originally requested $541,000 the first year and $670,000 the second year for 5 FTEs at the Fugitive Apprehension Unit. The House position provides for that request. Subsequent to the governor's original budget, he supplied additional money in the second year for 3 additional FTEs. The House does not provide for that subsequent request. On line 232, House File 1232, sex trafficking provisions modified. This would be the fiscal note for the requirement that additional people register as sex offenders. It is presumed that several people who would then, under this bill, be required to register as sex offenders would fail to do so, and this would be the bed impact of that new provision. On line 233, House File 71, enhanced penalties for criminal vehicular homicide. There was a bed impact, but it does not have any impact on the department until fiscal year 2019. That money is provided. In community services, we are at the governor's original request level, which would provide additional intensive supervised release, challenge incarceration supervision, additional money on the CCA formula and CPO formula. Those were all funded in the House bill. In the governor's supplemental request after the February forecast, he added an additional $1 million in intensive supervised release. We do not fund that additional $1 million, only the original $1 million a year requested by the governor. That money provides for each $1 million 3 state-employed intensive supervised release positions and 7 at the counties. So the House is at 3 state and 7 additional county employees. The governor is at 6 additional state, 14 additional county employees. And the House provides on line 247, House File 743, a Scott County probation addition of $85,000 per year to reflect money they lost moving from the CPO formula to a CCA county. Mr. Chair, that brings us to the final page, operations support. On line 255, the salary and insurance money is provided the same as the governor. The governor included additional money for insurance for permanently disabled employees. That language is in the House bill, which would require the agency to provide coverage for permanently disabled employees. However, the House position does not provide the money, and the agency would have to absorb the cost of this ongoing issue. On line 257, IT modernization, the governor requested $1.5 million per year. The House provides $500,000 per year, or 1/3 of the request. The governor provides 11 FTEs. The House position provides roughly funding for 3.5 FTEs. Mr. Chair, moving down to line 264, sentencing guidelines. We are at the same level as the governor's request, an increase for salaries and insurance. And then there are 3 revenue items beginning on line 272. For fiscal year 2016 and 17, we transfer $500,000 a year from the MinCore fund to fund the IT modernization you see on line 257. This is done on a one-time basis, and general fund dollars are provided for 18, 19, and ongoing years to pay for that item. On line 273, whenever we fund additional items at the post board, there is a revenue loss to the general fund. The post board items are funded from the state government special revenue account. This comes from collections they gather from their licensing function. Any money that is not appropriated to the agency through the SGSR fund is transferred in law to the general fund. So any appropriations we make to them from the SGS or the State Government Special Revenue Fund result in a general fund loss because those additional leftover monies are not transferred to the general fund. So essentially what you see on lines 273 and 274 are just reflections of the revenue loss to the general fund for the appropriations we made to the post board account. Those were for the de-escalation training grants and the insurance and salary increases to that agency. Mr. Chair, that's all of the change items in the DE2 and technical corrections amendment.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Walls. Questions from members? Okay, if there's no questions, we can move on to, the reason I was running around here out of the chair was I had forgot, my mistake, to add the A10 Authors Amendment, so I'd like to offer the A10 amendment at this point. Chair would move the A10 amendment for adoption. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Okay. Ms. Perius, you had Representative Hillsborough.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question is, do you want the money questions now, or should we just go through the whole bill and then ask the questions later? When would you like the questions, Mr. Chair?
The money questions now if you want, or you can, I'll just leave it up to you folks.
Maybe
What-
we'll just let her go through the whole bill, and then we'll ask
Okay.
questions at the end.
Ms. Perius, were you going to present the policy part?
Part of it, Mr. Chair, and
Okay.
I'll pass it up to Mr. Debo.
Okay, go ahead.
Mr. Chair, Mr. Walls went over a lot of the writer language in Article 1. Would you like me to point out any new language or just move to Article 2?
I think we'll go through the whole policy.
Okay. Mr. Chair and members, I'll be working up the DE2 amendment. I'll start in Article 1 and just point out some of the new provisions. On line 4.11, there's new language on combating terrorism recruitment. And line 4.27 is a rider on disaster assistance account. On line 5.10, you'll see the language Mr. Walls discussed about the BCA investment initiatives, which funds new permanent positions, lab equipment, and lab supplies. Mr. Chair, members, moving to page 6.24. This is the fire marshal provisions, and there's language starting on 6.32, which refers to the funding for the firefighter training, and then moving on to the top of page 7, the task force and the air rescue team. Mr. Chair and members, Mr. Walls went over the OJP riders. Those are on the bottom of page 7 and continue through pages 8 and 9. Continuing for new language on page 11.20 is the de-escalation training under the post board. On page 12.11 are the FTEs for the Fugitive Apprehension Unit. On line 13.11 is the Scott County Correctional Services funding. Moving down to 13.28 is the $500,000 MNCOR transfer. And then finally on line, or page 14, at the top is the tax court rider amendment. It amends the current biennium so that they can use money for operating expenses. And at the bottom, section 17 is Board of Judicial Standards clarifying that only unencumbered balances can be carried over. And that's from the governor's bill. So, Mr. Chair, members, those are just highlighting some of the new provisions in rider language in Article 1, but most of it was explained by Mr. Walls. And moving on to Article 2.
Go ahead.
I'm now on page 15 of the DE2. Sections 1 through 3 are Representative Hancock's House File 233. These sections allow the initial civil commitment hearings to be conducted by interactive video conference in compliance with the general rules of practice. Moving on to page 16. Sections 4 and 5 are Representative Vogel's bill, House File 1703. These relate to the tax court. Section 4 is extending the time for serving a motion, and Section 5 is increasing the monetary threshold for small claims division, and this will place tax court procedures in conformity with similar district court provisions. And finally, moving on to page 17, Section 6, this is Representative Zerwas's bill. It's setting the pre-judgment interest rate at 4% or the T-bill for all judgments regardless of the amount. Current law has a 10% rate for judgments over $50,000. And then there is an additional provision on page 19, line 15. And this section would provide that this interest rate will not apply in certain breach of insurance policy cases. And then, Mr. Chair, I'd like to turn it over to Jeff Diebel.
Okay, Mr. Debo, go ahead.
Mr. Chair and members, I'll continue on with Article 3, Public Safety. Sections 1 and 2 of Article 3 are from Representative Zerwas's Safe Harbor Bill and deal with address protection for participants in that program. Section 3 relates to suppressors, and that was actually deleted by the A10 amendment. Section 4 and 5 are from Representative O'Neill's scrap metal bill. Section 6 is the YIPA policy language regarding from Representative Uglam's bill on determining the matching requirements. Section 7 is from Representative Schoen's BCA technical bill, actually Section 7, 8, 9, and 10, which moves you over to page 23 of the DE2 amendment. Picking up at Section 11 is Representative Green's background checks for tribes, requiring the BCA to process those. Section 12 on page 23 and 13 on page 24 are additional sections from Representative Neal's House File 2152 regarding scrap metal. On page 24, we pick up some additional language from Representative Schoen's BCA technical bill with Section 14. Moving to page 25, you'll find Section 15 was deleted by the A10 amendment. That was a modification of the term silencer to suppressor, but that section has been deleted from the bill. Turning to page 26, Section 16 is Representative Nash's House File 372, which provides notice of intent to carry a pistol at the Capitol as a presumption based on the issuance of a permit to carry in the state. Also on 26, Section 17, that was relates to suppressors, but again, it was deleted as part of the A10 amendment. Moving to page 27, we pick up an additional 2 provisions from, actually 3 provisions from Representative Schoen's BCA technical bill, 18 through 20, which takes you over all the way to page 28. And on page 28, there'll be an insertion from the A10 amendment, which will be House File 830, and that is Representative Lucero's bill regulating the sale of firearms within and from without the state of Minnesota. Section 21 of the DE2 amendment is a modification of Representative Fabian's House File 305. As originally introduced, it related to the recognition of North Dakota's permit to carry in Minnesota, but the provision that remains in the DE2 amendment simply strikes the word substantially similar so that the comparison that the Department of Public Safety is charged with only requires that another state's law be similar as opposed to substantially similar to Minnesota's law to qualify for reciprocity of permits to carry. Moving to page 29, there'll be a new section in this part of the bill, which is, again, from the A10 amendment. This is Representative Newberger's House File 722. and that relates to the authority to seize and confiscate firearms during a state of emergency. The Section 22 on page 29 is from Representative Schoen's untested rape kit bill, which is House File 1140. And the final section of Article 3, Public Safety, is a repealer, which is taken from Representative O'Neill's scrap metal bill. Mr. Chair, I'll continue on with Article 4, which relates to firefighters. Sections 1 and 2 on page 30 are from House File 323, which is Representative Howe's bill regarding the pay and deductions for firefighters. Section 3 on page 31 is a provision from the Chair's House File 800 concerning the policy governing the fire safety account. The remaining sections in Article 4 on firefighters, 4 through 15, are from Representative Howe's firefighter licensing bill, and this is mostly technical changes, but also contains a provision allowing for expedited licensing of former military members. Mr. Chair, that takes us all the way up to page 35, which is Article 5 of entitled Corrections. Section 1 of Article 5 is Representative Detmer's House File 329, which provides insurance, continuing health insurance coverage for those injured in both secure hospitals and in DOC facilities as funded in the spreadsheet. Sections 2 through 5, beginning on page 36, are Representative Lane's House File 1247, which is a bill regulating the use of restraints in correctional facilities for pregnant incarcerated women. The Section 6 on page 38, actually Sections 6, 7, and 8 on 38 and 39 are from Representative Hertas's House File 969, which is Colton's Law. On page 39, you'll find Section 9, which is House File 2044, Representative Lomer's bill modifying the Community Corrections Act's formula statute. Section 10 on page 41 is another provision from Colton's Law. On page 42, Section 11 is Representative Zerwas's House File 535, which provides funds for Sherburne County probation. And Article 5 concludes with Sections 12 and 13, two additional provisions from Colton's Law, one the title and one the purpose, the last being the purpose statement. At this point, Ms. Pierce will pick up on Article 6, Mr. Chair.
Okay, Ms. Pierce, thank you.
Mr. Chair, members, we're on page 42 of the DE amendment, Article 6. Section 1 is Representative Quam's House File 1232. That was a sex trafficking bill, and this section is expanding data protections by prohibiting access that would reveal a sex trafficking victim's identity. On page 43, starting at line 25, Sections 2 and 3 are Representative Garofalo's bill. This is actually new language. Instead of amending the careless driving section, this would amend the reckless driving provision. It's going to strike the current definition of willful and wanton disregard for a person's safety and replace it with driving while being aware of and consciously disregarding a substantial and justifiable risk to harm to persons or properties. And then if you look at the top of page 44 on line 3, it's going to maintain the misdemeanor penalty for reckless driving, except in cases of great bodily harm and death. Those would be raised to a gross misdemeanor. Section 3 is also part of that bill. Moving on to Section 4 at the bottom of page 44. Sections 4 through 8 are all Representative Hertaus's bill, House File 1255. These are lowering the blood alcohol concentration from 0.20 to 0.16 for the definition of aggravating factor under the DWI law. These will enhance criminal provisions, and it will make the BAC threshold for criminal penalties the same as it is for administrative sanctions currently. So this puts us at page 46. At the bottom, on line 27, section 9, this is Chair Cornish's bill. It's amending the DWI implied consent law to authorize a petitioner to raise the affirmative defense of necessity. That takes us to the middle of page 48. Section 10 actually reflects two different bills. On line 48.25, this is from House File 1433, Representative Hillstrom's bill. It's requiring offenders who commit a violation of a new provision you'll see in Section 26, which is non-consensual photographs and videos, to register as predatory offenders. And then the provisions starting on line 29 are from Representative Quam's bill, House File 1232, and this is expanding registration for sex trafficking offenses and prostitution offenses. Moving on to Section 11 on page 50. This is also from Representative Quam's sex trafficking bill, and it is adding the crime of sex trafficking to the definition of violent crime, which would be subject to higher penalties. Moving down to the bottom of page 50, line 29. Sections 12 through 14 are all from Representative Swazinski's criminal vehicular homicide bill. This is the bill that created a 15-year felony for a person who's convicted of CVH occurring within 10 years of a prior qualified driving offense. And the new definition of qualified prior driving offenses in Section 12. That takes us to page 53. Section 15 is, House File 783, Chair Cornish's bill. This is expanding the fourth-degree assault protections to employees supervising and working directly with mentally ill and dangerous patients at the security hospital. Next, on page 54, line 15, sections 16 through 18 are from Representative Quam's sex trafficking bill. Section 16 is creating a 5-year felony for hiring or agreeing to hire an individual the actor reasonably believes is under the age of 18 to engage in prostitution. Section 17 provides that the use of an undercover op is not a defense to a prostitution charge. And Section 18 is amending the burden for an affirmative defense for trafficking victims. Section 19 is next. It's on line 55.23. This is from House File 889, Representatives Hillstrom's bill. It's extending the offense of 5th-degree CSC to cover cases where the sexual contact is made through the offender's seminal fluid. This takes us to Section 20, which is another provision from Representative Quam's sex trafficking bill. It's again expanding data protections to protect the person's identity. Section 21 starts on 56.16. This is Representative Norton's bill, House File 104. It is adding the crime of financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult to the forfeiture laws. Next, we're on page 57, Section 22. It's at the bottom of the page. Section 22 all the way through Section 24 are Representative Johnson's bill. It's creating a new offense for property arson, which results in bodily harm to a person. That takes us to section 25 on the top of page 59. This is from Representative Hillstrom's House File 889, adulteration by bodily fluid. This is new language. It's removing the definition of, or removing saliva from the definition of bodily fluid. It will actually place that crime in paragraph A on line 9. So it will establish a misdemeanor penalty for adding saliva to a substance if the other person ingests the substance. Paragraphs B and C will cover adulteration by bodily fluid under the new definition that does not include saliva, and there will be a misdemeanor for adulterating a substance intended for consumption. And paragraph C will establish a gross misdemeanor where the offender adds the bodily fluid and a person ingests the substance. The next section is 26 on line 59.18. This is from House File 1433, Representative Hillstrom's bill. It establishes criminal liability for a person who takes or disseminates a non-consensual photograph or video that was recorded in a restroom, locker room, or changing room. Section 27 on page 60, line 23, is amending the crime of criminal defamation. This is from House File 537, Representative Hillstrom's bill. Moving on to page 61, line 15. Sections 28 through 31 are from Representative Quam's House File 1232, sex trafficking. Sections 28 and 29 relate to polygraph prohibitions. Section 30 at the bottom of page 61 relates to restrictions on ownership of adult businesses. And on page 62, we are increasing the criminal limitations for filing sex trafficking charges. And then on page 63 at the very bottom, section 32, this is from Representative Garofalo's bill, the new provisions on reckless driving and enhanced penalties, entitling it the Jacqueline Devney and Thomas Considine Roadway Safety Act. And then lastly, on the top of page 64, this is a revisor instruction related to the CVH bill, House File 71. And Mr. Chair, I'll move to Mr. Diebel.
Okay, Mr. Diebel.
Mr. Chair and members, I'll conclude with the brief summary of Articles 7 and 8. Article 7 is entitled Disaster Assistance. Many of the provisions in this article have not been heard by the committee before because they're original to House File 849, with the lone exception being Section 2. Section 1 on page 64 expands the purposes for which disaster assistance contingency account funds may be used for matching purposes by listing 2 additional federal assistance programs that provide funds to the state. Section 2 is Representative Erdahl's House File 484, which makes utility co-ops eligible for disaster assistance. Section 3 on page 65 amends the term, a definition of applicant in the disaster assistance statute, and authorize, which the effect of this is to, by adding state government, authorizes state government agencies to apply for disaster assistance matching grants. Section 4 adds a definition of county to the disaster assistance chapter. Section 5 implements this new definition of county by replacing the reference to local government with a reference to county government. This will, in Section 5, this will clarify that the criteria for disaster assistance include the declaration of a disaster or emergency by the state or a county. Moving to page 66, Section 6 of the bill, of the article, establishes a timeline for counties to request that the governor declare a state of disaster and specifies what a county's request for disaster assistance must include. That takes us to the end of Article 7 and up to Article 8, which is entitled Controlled Substances. This entire article is comprised of Representative Barrett's House File 1376, which you'll recall is an attempt to update the Minnesota Controlled Substance Schedules to correspond with the federal Controlled Substance Schedules. Mr. Chair, that concludes our overview of the policy articles.
Okay. Okay, questions from members. Representative Hilstman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. If I could actually just get some clarification on the changes that are made to the disaster relief, and so I'm not sure who the best person to answer those questions are, Mr. Chair.
Somebody here from DPS that could explain, that came from the governor's budget. You want to just explain, yes, more specific question?
Sure, Mr. Chair. I just really want to know about the implication by adding state government as an agency that can apply, and then striking out local and making the county government able to declare. This is going to make it more expansive, and who's eligible. Is that, I'm just trying to get clarification that more people are going to qualify, and then is there enough money in the fund to already fund the ones that we get in requests?
I'll go ahead and start with your name, organization, and begin.
Mr. Chair, members, my name is Joe Kelly. I'm the Director of the Division of Homeland Security and Emergency Management with the Department of Public Safety. Representative Hillstrom, to your questions first about the expanded or the addition of additional federal disaster relief programs, specifically the Federal Highway Administration and then the United States Department of Agriculture's Natural Resources Conservation System program. Those are companion programs to FEMA. The FEMA programs cover damage to public infrastructure, not including, federal assisted roads. That is covered by the Federal Highway Administration. Typically, historically, the legislature, as you did at the beginning of the session, has appropriated money to make a match for that federal program. Depending on the type of road, whether it's an interstate highway or another road, it's a 90 federal, 10 state split. With lower classifications road, it's 80% contribution on the part of the federal government if there's a 20% match. So it does expand the eligibility of the disaster contingency account. But as I said, historically, in order to get the maximum amount of disaster relief from the federal government, the legislature has appropriated funds for that purpose. The one that is from the Department of Agriculture, the Emergency Watershed Program, that's a program that we have typically not been able to use in Minnesota because they require a commitment of the non-federal share during the disaster. So within about, typically it's a 10 to 14 days after the onset of a disaster, we have to be able to commit to that program, which provides for remediation of imminent danger. In other words, there's been an example would be there's been a flood, either a bank is undercut or a hillside is about to fail. The federal government will come in and help on a 75-25% basis to help shore up and mitigate that threat before it results in damage. So that's the first part of that program, which expands, or of this recommendation, which expands the state cost share beyond just FEMA and goes to those other companion programs.
Mr. Chair.
Representative Hilstrom.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Let me just make it a little more clear. So does the language allow, by striking the local government and making it a county, does it make more people eligible or fewer people eligible? And then is this directly related to the disaster contingency account, which is on line 108 of the spreadsheet? I just want to know if more people get it or fewer, and if there's enough money to cover whoever we're saying is eligible.
Mr. Kelly?
Mr. Chair, Representative, I don't think it has any effect on the number eligible because the way this disaster contingency account and the state disaster program was designed, it was to have counties accumulate damages from their local governments, and if they accumulated enough to get to a certain threshold, they would have the opportunity to ask the governor for a disaster declaration, making them eligible for the disaster contingency account. The first time the law that passed was relatively unclear about what local government, because we consider, counties are considered local governments, as are townships and cities, and the intent was, in order to go through the normal progression that we go through from a city to a county to the state, and the way the program is structured with the thresholds of damage that once you exceed them, you're eligible to ask for a disaster assistance. We just put some structure. I don't think it changes increasing or decreasing the availability of the program because we never had a city level threshold in place. And I don't know if that answers your question,
That's fine.
Representative.
Representative Hills? Okay, thank you, Mr. Kelly. Members, questions on either the spreadsheet or the policy portion?
Mr. Chair.
Representative Hilstrom, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. On line 109 of the spreadsheet, the anti-terror, ISIS, and al-Shabaab recruitment money, my question is, who's getting that money, and what's it going for?
I think it was in the rider language in the bill with explanation. Ms. Pierce, could you or Mr. Debo go back to that and highlight that?
Mr. Chair and members, it's on page 4, line 11 is the rider. This is new language to the bill, and it's a grant to the Commissioner of Public Safety to develop strategies and then report those strategies back to attempt to prevent the recruitment of Minnesotans to terrorist organizations.
So, Mr. Chair.
Representative Hilstrom.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was just trying to get clarification. So this is actually funding something in the commissioner. It's not a grant to someone else. It's strictly to stay with the Department of Public Safety.
Right, and it looks like it's quite generous funding. Usually the studies that they do don't cost nearly that much, but we wanted to make sure, since it was such an important subject, we gave them enough to develop the strategy.
Okay.
Representative Schoen.
Mr. Chair, so who at DPS is going to be administering that? What area is it? Is it OJP? Is it Homeland Security?
Representative Schoen, typically when we give the money to the commissioner, we don't get too elaborate in the instructions on how they do it. They leave it up to the command team there. So we'll count on them to put the strategy together and get back to us. Representative Considine?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Could I ask Commissioner Roy a question?
Pertaining to,
Well, I wonder how this is going to work when we gave him the blessing for 74 positions, but there's no money. I'm kind of wondering how he's going to implement that.
well, Representative Considine, the Department of Corrections told us they were going to fund that project, whether we gave them the money or not. So I imagine they're just going to fund it. Two different people from the department told me that. So that they're just going to take it out of their existing resources, I understand. They would love to have the money, but we didn't fund it.
So what are they going to cut, though, then, or take it from? That's, I guess, what I would be
I
wondering.
don't know, typically Representative Considine, in situations like that, and bills we have where we tell them they have to absorb the, we leave it up to them rather than us telling what they have to take it out of.
Well, I wasn't planning on telling them how. I was just wondering what it was that they were going to take it out of. What's the plan?
I would say that this time they probably don't know. Because they haven't been through the whole bill process and seen what the Senate is offering and whether they're going to end up with $0 or $10,000.
So the answer to my question is no.
Well, we could have him come down, but I mean, it would, I've already told him there was no public testimony. But if you wanted to hear how he would do it, you want him to come down?
I just would like to know what the plan is.
Okay, Representative, or, excuse me, Commissioner Roy, if you could come down and tell us where you're gonna get the money that you are gonna fund either way. Good luck.
Mr. Chair, Representative Considine, good morning, good afternoon. The funding of that particular initiative is going to be challenging without support of the committee. And we have, I think, established it as a priority with the governor and his budget. And we are very hopeful that this committee will support the effort. We have an over $1 billion biennial budget that has some room for initiatives. We struggle, of course, with all the requirements that we are faced with every day. But we feel strongly that this particular initiative is important in terms of supporting safety of our staff, the quality of services that we're providing for the inmates, and a significant security issue for us as well. These particular workers are contract workers now, and they are charged with some of the most intensive work that we do in our prisons, and that is inmate labor and the management of inmates within the kitchen in these facilities. And we feel that it is really important that we have a level of professionalism within those ranks. So again, until this is a done deal, we're not really sure how it's going to be funded specifically.
Representative Considine, I should make clear that we're not requiring them to do this. They did this on their own volition, and so it's not something we're requiring them to do that we need to fund them on. It was a choice of ours to fund, and we had some concern about it because they said there was like 28 instances over 7 prisons in 5 years. It come out to about 0.8 incidents per prison, and so we weighed that back and forth. And plus, not only are they going to fund the 74 spots, but also do some remodeling on their own in the kitchens. And so we were wondering how come they had that excess amount of money left over. They could just do it on their own without coming to us in the first place. And then when you lobby people for money, the best thing to do is not tell them you're going to fund it whether you give them the money or not, because with the lack of resources we have in the committee, we're naturally not going to fund something that somebody's going to fund if we're not. So that's what went through our mind.
And I understand that, and what went through mine is my daughter works at one of the institutions, and I want to make sure she's okay.
So thank you for your question, and Representative Dean.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair, and this would be to you, Commissioner Roy, as well. When I also look at line 257, I see in the governor's budget it was $1.5 million for the next 2 years, and we're only authorizing $500,000 in 16 and 17, as well as ongoing in 18 and 19. And so when I look at these two things, it's $3.5 million, which I think is a lot to address. And so not only are you going to be addressing the issue around the vending, my question is, what is this going to do to the IT modernization? Does it put a stop to it because it's not fully funded, or will you be able to make progress and begin to move forward?
Mr. Chair, Representative Dean, we are significantly challenged by information technology systems that are becoming archaic, and we are not unique in the state of Minnesota. This particular money will go to enhance existing programs and maintenance of programs that will fail very soon. And we have a rather extensive list of enhancements that have to happen within our department. We are an information-dependent agency. We interact with the Bureau of Criminal Apprehension, Probation, Parole Services. around the state, FBI, all of the integrated criminal justice information systems are critical to our function, and this is a very conservative request, and we actually have multi-million-dollar needs, but we also recognize the challenge of this committee and budgets generally.
Okay. Questions? Any other questions on the spreadsheet? Representative Schoen.
Well, I wasn't 100% finished earlier, so I'm going to have questions for Assistant Commissioner Danaski on a couple different areas. So just let me know when it's appropriate to go to that route.
Well, that's one thing we wanted to stay with was public testimony, because we heard we weren't going to give any, and now certain people didn't come because we weren't going to take testimony, and now we're bringing them down one by one. But is it something you didn't hear in the original? Like, we heard basically all this information in the original introduction of, we spent days in testimony, so we're just asking them to repeat stuff we've already heard now.
I have questions on a couple issues and highlighting a couple. I think it's important to highlight some. I mean, I can just make statements if you want me to, but I mean, I think there's a couple of things I want to clarify, and when it comes to the funding, and I know you got a target that, you know, I'm less than impressed with, but I mean, it's better than HHS by all means, but I think that there's a couple of things I want to highlight that I think are really important when it comes down to what was left out, or what is the intent, or what if public safety is okay with one particular provision. There was changes that were made in the reciprocity bill, you know, a few different things, and so I just wanted to get some clarification from them.
I'd rather have you make statements, because we already know what agencies are going to say if we take money from them. If they took money from me, then, or didn't give, I would say, well, I don't like that, and I wish I had more, and the sky is going to fall. But
Well, so
if you want to hear
the one
that-
question I want to hear, the one question I want answered is I want more information about the, definitely want, Mr. Chair, I want answered related to the Al-Shabaab ISIS money, and I want to know if they're planning to administer a grant, or if they're planning to do something themselves, and if it's grant money, who do they expect it to go to? And so that is a question that I think deserves to be answered.
Yeah, that's a new piece that we put into the bill, and we said we would allow, and that actually came from our idea, that it wasn't a request from them, so we can find out what they're going to do with the 25 Gs. Somebody want to come down and talk about what they're going to do with the anti-terrorism recruitment plan? Commissioner Doman and Danansky, welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair and members, if I understand the question correctly, what the intent of the funding is with the ISIL appropriation.
Correct.
This is not an agency initiative, and so we would have to sit down and with staff and decide based on the intent of the appropriation what would be the best way to move forward on a study.
And Mr. Chair, so this came from you?
Yes.
Well, what do you want done with it?
That's up to them. Well, usually when we develop a plan to stop recruitment, like
Yeah.
you've been seeing in the papers, we leave it to the experts to come up, rather than me sitting up in room 369 thinking, this is what I'd like to do to stop terrorism. We give it to the expert, and then they're going
I'm
to
supportive,
develop a
Mr. Chair.
strategy.
I just am curious what the thought, I mean, what ideas that maybe you had thought would be merit. I mean, I'm on board.
I just got sick and tired of seeing it on the news media, how people were recruiting people to fight overseas, and I know there was a lot of concern by the public, and so I thought it would be great to generate some money to give to DPS to come up with a great plan to fight the recruitment of our young people and brainwashing and sending them overseas. That's about it. Representative Hillstrom.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and while we have the commissioner here, thank you, Commissioner, for the submission of your letter. Members, I think you all have a letter from the commissioner in your packet. Commissioner, does this encompass all of your comments related to the bill? I just want to make sure we have.
Mr. Chair,
Commissioner Doman.
Representative Hillstrom and members, yes, it does. Thank you.
Thank you.
Representative Schoen.
Well, just real quick though, I think it's worthwhile because we did make a change in here, Mr. Chair, about the bill that was related to the North Dakota reciprocity issue. And so that appears to be changed in the omnibus bill compared to the original. So I'm just curious from what the original bill was, what this does, how the commissioner feels about their ability to handle the change there.
I'll let the Commissioner answer, but just,
Yeah.
we took out of all the language about class 1 or 2 and mandated that they change, and so the only thing left in the bill now, the entire bill, is with the permit reciprocity, is striking the word substantially and leaving similar. Go ahead, Commissioner Doman, ordinance.
Mr. Chair, Representative, the department has looked at this and talked to council, and the department is neutral on this, of course, but we feel that we can work within this language.
Okay, Mr. Chair, so this is, do you find this is a better than the more prescriptive or the clear delineation? I mean, what would be, in your mind, wrong with, or if it's problematic, or whatever term you want to use, in saying, hey, well, we got to let you use North Dakota, or you got to accept North Dakota? And then outside of that, this.
Commissioner.
Mr. Chair, Representative, in looking and carving out individual states, I think that it would become problematic and kind of precedent setting that every year somebody might come forward bringing another state and just adding state after state after state, and it would become kind of cumbersome to have the statute written like that. As I mentioned, as I've talked to several people about this, the way that it's written, we would look at states that are not similar to this section. We would still continue to look at 713 and 714 and the intent of previous legislation about who can and who shouldn't be carrying in the state of Minnesota, and would relate to that. But we feel that we could work within the confines of this.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, if it's okay, I'll make just a couple comments. Sure. You know, one of the things that, and I actually feel you are disappointed as well too, is what the funding to the BCA in particular, and as it relates to agents. And I think what's difficult for many Minnesotans to understand is, you know, when you look at a big news event related to a crime, you see that BCA crime van in the background, and you see the jackets that say BCA Special Agent, and what they do for our local agencies. And we had talked to Assistant Commissioner Danaski and Commissioner Dolan about this earlier. I was thinking about the Jacob Wetterling case alone, and what that would do in cost-wise to the taxpayers of Stearns County and Representative Howe's district, and the amount of money that's been spent on it. If Stearns County had to absorb that all on their own, and be able to try to do those investigations, and I know we've used them in Cottage Grove and every agency outside of St. Paul and Minneapolis and Hennepin County utilized the BCA for some very expensive and necessary investigation tools. And so, I mean, they have been cut over the years. I think there was a time when there was, you know, upwards of 70 agents, and we're down to in the area of 40 some. And we really got to get back to understanding the work that they do, or at least trying to help the public understand how important it is to invest in that, especially for smaller agencies that can't afford all that extra equipment and the people. Again, I'm looking at another piece of the bill with the scrap metal issue. I wish that we were just moving that back a couple of years rather than go for the full repeal. I'm not excited about that from a law enforcement perspective. I do agree that we do need to make sure that the scrap metal folks are in compliance, and they wouldn't be because we don't have a system in place. But, you know, somehow I think that's kind of on us to make sure that that happens. And I think a better way is not a full repeal, but maybe a timeline in action, and to get the players back to the table and just get it fixed right, because I think it's a worthwhile system when it's in the end. So I'm only half there with you on that one. But other than that, I certainly wish we were doing better for everybody. And I think we're lucky that we got a little bit more when other committees got so much less. So thank you.
Yeah, Representative Schoen, I agree. One thing I just want to make the audience clear of, though, is that I don't think the original governor's budget had a request in for more of the special agents. How many are there now? Like 60 or the BCA agents?
Mr. Chair? I believe the total is, and Superintendent Setter might have these numbers. I don't have, I have the report back in the back of the room. I think in 1998, we had roughly 68 agents. That didn't include special agents in charge and likely did not include the superintendent and assistant superintendent. And I think we're down near 50 to 55 agents at this time.
Mr. Setter?
Mr. Chair, Wade Sitter, BCA Superintendent. We have 49 field agents right now and then 6 staffs as special agents in charge, superintendent, assistant superintendent. Our peak was probably 1998 when we had 68 field agents, so we're down about 30%.
So Representative Schoen, you and I will have to keep on them about next time they go to the front of the governors and ask for money that they should include a bunch of special agents.
Well, Mr. Chair, I think that actually was part of the original budget.
You know, did you have a request in for special agents? Because I thought it was just task force.
No, Mr. Chair, no, we had an addition of about 15 agents in our original request that came through the governor's budget.
Of regular field agents?
Yes, sir.
Not the crime task force or the predatory offenders or the crime, the financial crime?
Mr. Chair, the predatory offenders are actually BCA employees that have a statutory responsibility for identifying non-compliant level 3 predatory
Okay.
offenders under state law. So they don't work with the federal, any of the federal assets.
Great.
Mr. Chair, if I could add, it is a governor's initiative, governor's priority, and it is part of our BCA investment initiative.
Okay. So the, all those other FTEs in there that you had asked for were additional, not the special agents that we're talking about, the 50 or the 49er.
Mr. Chair, I believe there was about 32 FTEs in the governor's request. About 15 were agents. The remainder were forensic scientists. There were some digital forensic examiners and some analysts that support the agents.
So part of that request was the special agents then?
That's correct, sir.
Right, of those FTEs, okay. All right. Representative Ward.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and to Commissioner, welcome. I just want to ask about your letter and Office of Justice programs, and particularly the youth intervention programs. I'm really disappointed that there's not something in the budget for that, and I'm wondering what, I mean, obviously you'd like more money, but your letter doesn't mention the investments in youth intervention programs, and I'm wondering if there's a reason for that.
Mr. Chair?
Commissioner Dolman, go ahead.
Thank you, Representative Ward. The, any funding for the youth intervention programs was not part of the governor's proposal, was not part of our initiative package.
Okay. Questions? If not, we'll move on to amendments. And would you take them in, order, numerical? Take them in numerical order, Representative Hillstrom?
That's fine, except Representative Considine walked away from the table for a second, so we could skip his and come back to his when he comes back.
Okay. Oh, that's his amendment?
He has the A2 amendment, Mr. Chair.
Okay. Who's got the A1? Representative Ward, you want to move your amendment?
Mr. Chair, I move the A1 amendment, please.
And
This is the emergency shelter for domestic abuse for East African women and victims of child domestic abuse and trafficking. One-time appropriation.
okay, any comments or questions?
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
I would be happy to try to answer any questions that people had. We did have testimony on this.
Right.
It's a fairly small amount of money with a great return on investment, and as we talked about, recruiting people for terrorism, you know, some of those young people have come out of some very difficult situations. And if we can invest a little bit of money to intervene at an earlier stage and get connected with the young people who are being abused. Also, it will connect with some young people who are ending up in our criminal justice system, which the families don't understand. And so if we can make this connection, it's a very small amount of money and a one-time investment that I think will return faster than what we're trying to do with the other larger appropriation. Thank you.
Any other comments or questions? The Representative Ward, this is one we chose not to fund, unfortunately, but there was a number of them. I mean, we failed to hear like 85 bills this year, and then a lot of these requests we failed to fund, and so I would probably have to vote no on your amendment.
Is there some other, Mr. Chair, is there some other little pocket of money that we could borrow from? Or some other aspect of that we can find a small amount of money for a big return on the investment? That would be my request.
No, there's pretty much scraped the bucket, and to dole out to what we did and went over it time and time again, unfortunately, and you know, I have to deal with the cards you're dealt, so. All right, you heard the amendment, the A1, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? No. Motion does not prevail, okay. Representative Considine,
Your A2.
you have the A2 amendment?
We heard this just the other day, Mr. Chair, and I would like a roll call on this.
Roll call has been requested.
This one, like I said the other day, was the one bill that I looked at as a no-brainer. It saves children's lives, and one extensive search will exceed the $100,000 that's on it. I think you remember, Mr. Chair, the chief deputy of Nicollet County that also was the guy that found the one dead victim after the tornado in St. Peter. And it's also quite devastating for law enforcement people that find dead children. He would, I believe today, be the sheriff of Nicollet County if he had not found that 6-year-old and decided after that to retire. This one to me is something that we should be moving forward, and that's, I guess, the end of it.
Okay. Any other comments or questions? Representative Considine, just the short answer is that, once again, you know, we had a target we had to reach, and there was going to be lots of disappointed people and a few happy ones, and this is the way we chose to distribute the funds. So. Okay, a roll call has been requested on the A2 amendment. The LA will take the roll call.
Representative Cornish.
Nay.
Representative Johnson.
No.
Representative Considine.
Yes.
Representative Dean.
Yes.
Representative Hertos.
No.
Representative Hillstrom.
Yes.
Representative Howe.
Negative.
Representative Lomer.
No.
Representative Lucero.
No.
Representative Newberger.
No.
Representative O'Neill. Representative Quam.
No.
Representative Rosenthal.
Aye.
Representative Schoen.
Aye.
Representative Ward.
Yes.
Representative Winkler.
Yes.
Representative Zerwas.
Can you enter me as a no, please?
All right. Representative O'Neill.
No.
Uh, 10 nays and 7 ayes, motion does not prevail. A4 amendment, Ron?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. That's my amendment.
Okay, Representative Hillstrom.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Members, this deletes the section that is the changing the interest rate that people pay on prior to judgments. Members, we heard testimony that this was an ALEC bill that the goal was to reduce the amount that people who are refusing to pay money that they owe and giving them the incentives to draw out these settlements. And so I would just request members remove the language from the bill.
Okay, thank you, Representative Hilstrom. Representative Zerwas, comment?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, members, we're having distributed the prejudgment interest rate by states, and you'll see that only a few states have the current 10% or higher. It also should be noted that in the last 2 years, 25 states have lowered their interest rates. I think this is a pretty good compromise, as this deals just with the prejudgment portion of the process in committee. We heard about, you know, if a judgment comes through, why should there be an incentive to delay and delay and delay payment? We're not dealing with post-judgment. Post-judgment interest will stay the same. This just deals with the prejudgment interest rate, and it'll go back to 4% of the T-bill, whichever is higher. I'd ask for a no vote.
Mr. Chair.
Representative Hilstrom.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Representative Zerwas, I think it's great that you say this is a great compromise, except I think you just compromised with yourself and didn't compromise with any of the folks that might be opposed to the proposal. So members, again, I would ask for members to support removing it from the bill.
Representative Ward? Representative Winkler?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We're often confused. Representative Zerwas, you handed out this sheet, and it says that it's compiled by Minnesotans for Lawsuit Reform. And since you distributed this to the committee, I wonder if you could tell us who this organization is and who pays for it.
Representative Zerwas.
Mr. Chair, I don't know who pays the bills, pays the rent for Minnesota Lawsuit Reform. There's some of the advocates that worked with me in crafting the original bill.
Mr. Chair, Representative Zerwas, since you passed it out, who are some of those advocates?
As far as, Mr. Chair, members,
Representative Zerwas.
as far as the lobbyists themselves,
Or the organizations they represent, Mr. Chair?
Representative Winkler. Representative Zerwas.
I don't know the specific organizations that this conglomerate represents, but I can tell you who I've been meeting with. I think the one group testified at the original bill hearing here and in civil law.
Mr. Chair, Representative Zerwas, obviously you could share. I think it was the Independent Business Coalition or whoever that person is. And I guess the question is, who's behind the bill? And Mr. Chair, you've got a lot of good things in your bill, and you don't set the targets. Though I'm sure you'll be voting for the tax cut bill that will make all the targets the reality that they are. But there are a couple things in here that just, even in public safety, you see the influence of big money in campaigns and elections and the influence of lobbyists, and we see this in the sheet passed out. The other one, of course, is the scrap metal dealers, which actually pitted public safety versus this particular corporate interest, and we're still seeing it in this bill, even though public safety organizations testified against it. And Representative Zerwas, you bring this forward, and I just think it's fair that you would actually specifically say who some of the organizations are who favor this provision, since you handed the sheet out.
We usually don't call people out by name in these committees, but if you had to remember the organizations, otherwise we can get back to you if it makes a difference. I mean, but it won't make any difference on the votes, but it.
Well, Mr. Chair,
Mr. Chair, the public record still is of some significance.
Mr. Chair, members, I think we had someone from the Insurance Institute that testified in civil law, one of the committees, and then we had, I believe, the National Federation of Independent Business Owners were also testifiers in favor of my bill as it worked through committee.
But you are right, we got huge money on both sides, both parties that come down here.
And
Representative Winkler.
And Mr. Chair, just briefly to be clear, if there's super big money going into campaigns, it certainly isn't going into my campaign.
Mr. Chair and Representative Zerwas, there sure can be after the campaign finance repealers pass from the state government finance bill. You'll have no restrictions whatsoever.
All right.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay. Any questions? This is the, I want to make sure I get it right here. A4 amendment. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? No. Motion does not prevail. The A5 amendment, alternatives to juvenile detention.
Mr. Chair, that's my amendment. I'd like to offer it, and I'd like to ask for a roll call.
Roll call's been requested.
And I'd also like to offer amendment here, a verbal amendment, if the committee is willing. And that's to move the decimal place 1 point to the left, so to change the appropriation from $1 million each year to $100,000 each year, in the hope that the GOP members might be willing to support, or would be willing to support, this important program, giving it less of a financial impact. So right now, we're handing out some information about the JDAI, and the reason that I'm bringing it up and feeling it's important to talk a bit about this is we did not hear this in committee. This was one of the bills that weren't brought forward to us. So for those of you who don't know, if you look at the appropriation notes towards the back, I mean, this is a program that's been impacting many counties throughout Minnesota for several years now, and the goal of this is really beginning to expand this program, which diverts juveniles who are picked up for a variety of incidences and diverts them away from detention. Juvenile detention is one of the most expensive forms of lockup that we currently have in our state, and ultimately this is taking them from that situation. Oh, and if I could just add, Mr. Chair, this is actually putting your bill a little bit more in balance, because this comes from Representative Zerwas. It's a piece of one of the bills that he introduced. So, I mean, I would just say that this is balancing it back the other way from your earlier comment today. But this is a bill that would allow JDAI to continue to expand into other counties who really do want this type of a program to divert their juveniles away from detention and hopefully allow them the opportunity to change course on their actions and their directions in the state of Minnesota. And if you are amenable, Mr. Chair, I'd actually like to invite Brian Smith down to say a few words about what he's been hearing from other counties in regards to the desire to have this program brought into their counties. I mean, it's the type of thing that we have to step up as the state to help get these counties moving, because there's some initial costs in the beginning, and ultimately there ends up being cost savings for these counties. But to ask the counties to absorb that cost to start this, I think is a little bit out of line. So if the director, Brian Smith, could come down, I would appreciate that if you'd give him a few minutes of testimony.
We haven't heard the bill, and so this is kind of out of order, but since he asked you to come down, why don't you take a minute or... Why don't you, what's that? Why don't you just give us about a minute worth of testimony, because I'd already said that we weren't going to allow a testimony, so you want to
Mr. Chair, I believe your comment was we weren't going to allow a testimony because these bills had been heard, and this is, I'm introducing something as an amendment that hadn't been heard at all.
You mean it hadn't been heard in front of our committee?
Yeah, that's correct.
I see what you mean. Okay, go ahead, sir. How long are you going to take? I mean, do you have a lengthy presentation, or you just want to make a few comments?
Mr. Chair, no. Mr. Chair, committee, my name is Brian Smith. I'm the state coordinator for JDAI, the Juvenile Detention Alternatives Initiative, and also office at the Association of Minnesota Counties. JDAI, the Juvenile Detention Alternatives Initiative, was started by the Annie E. Casey Foundation roughly 24 years ago, when they looked at the over-incarceration of youth throughout the United States. And what they found was that detention was harmful and it wasn't cost effective, and we were actually putting the public at greater risk by locking up children who did not belong in juvenile detention. And so what they did was they came up with an initiative that helped to screen kids coming into detention to make sure that we kept the appropriate kids, those who are a threat to public safety and a flight risk, and those who weren't. We wanted to make sure that we can put them in alternative placements, which were less costly and more effective. And we brought the initiative to Minnesota in 2006. We started in Hennepin County, Ramsey County, and Dakota County. And now we've also added St. Louis County, Rice County, and Olmsted to the Juvenile Detention Alternatives Initiative. And as you can see in your handouts, we were able to reduce the numbers in detention by, detention admissions went down by 66% in all counties that participate in the Juvenile Detention Alternatives Initiative, as well as the average daily population has come down by 61% in the aggregate in all those counties. We also realized cost savings in each of those counties where, for an example, prior to this initiative, Dakota County was about to build an additional beds to the juvenile detention facility, and we asked them to give us a shot with this initiative to institutionalize some change, and they did so, and were able to save roughly between $10 and $14 million when they were about to build a new facility, and now they actually rent beds to other counties because they don't fill up their beds from Dakota County children. And so they've actually made over $1 million a year since the change by placing other young people in their detention facility and not from their own county. And it also saved Hennepin and Ramsey money, which, for example, Ramsey County had a total of 82.11 FTEs in 2005. By the end of 2013, those FTEs have been reduced to 50.94, and the same in Hennepin County from 74.5 FTEs to 37.8. And so when they realized the cost savings, they were able to shift employees to community-based alternatives. They were also able to put those cost savings back into alternatives to detention, so that instead of spending roughly $300 a day on detaining young people who could be treated in the community, they then put those cost savings into community alternatives at the estimate of about $65 a day. And so what we're asking for in our the appropriation would be to fund the additional counties who wanted to come on board. Cost savings are usually realized after year 3, and you don't have to fund it anymore. It becomes institutionalized, and all the positions and all the alternatives to detention are actually paid for through the cost savings. And so this is not an initiative where we be coming back to the legislature over and over again asking for money. It's about institutionalizing change and bringing all the major stakeholders together so that we can define the purpose of detention, make sure we keep our community safe, and put young people in the appropriate placements instead of just looking to detention as the cure-all.
Representative Dean and Representative Hillsborough.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to acknowledge that my chief is here from Brooklyn Center. This is one of the most important initiatives that my chief has brought to my attention, Mr. Chair. I don't know if he had any intention of saying anything, but I want to make sure that because he's come all this way, that he had the opportunity for you all to know that he's here in support.
Thank you. Representative Dean, did you have any?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Smith. You know, again, I'm bringing this forward because I think it's a really critical program. I've reduced the amount so that we can include this as part of the bill. I am optimistic that we will fund this and include it in the bill here, and that it will come back from conference with the money that it's really, really going to take to expand it. I know that we didn't hear the bill. I know there were a lot of bills we didn't hear, but this is one that I think is really critical. It ultimately is going to save the state money in the long run and save the counties money in the long run, and that I think we need to be thinking about today as well as thinking about what the future is. So I would ask that members support this
and that we allow it to be incorporated into the bill.
Representative Zerwas?
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. Members, this was my, a portion of a larger bill around juvenile justice that I was carrying that wasn't heard. And I understand what the targets and the limitations that the chair has and that the committee has, that we're probably not going to be able to include it in this bill. But if the members of the committee and the chair can indulge me for a second, and in the information that was passed out, and open up to page 4, and you look at the counties that are participating, and then the kind of all counties, and just the significant impact that occurred with this program, and dropping, in some cases, up to 60% of detentions, the daily population, readmissions. I think that's something worth studying for the future and funding in the future. The one thing we're not going to be able to do is just keep adding money for jail cells. We've tried that for 2 decades. At some point, we have to do some alternatives, and we have to do some diversion. And my hope is, as we go through and we continue this discussion throughout the biennium, that there's an opportunity to really discuss this. I know the larger juvenile justice bill had some components that different stakeholder groups weren't very comfortable with. But to be clear, the JDAI portion of it, this portion of it, was not one of those components that was controversial at all. And so I hope as we move forward, we can continue to keep this in mind, and if there's an opportunity to find some money for it, because at some point we gotta stem the flow of young people going to jail.
Representative Dean, if you'll consider an oral amendment to cut it in half to $500,000 a year, I'll consider asking my members to vote for it.
Go with that.
Yes.
What? Excuse me. I'd give you quite an increase. Yeah.
No backs.
No backs.
Mr. Chair?
Yeah, I meant, you know what I meant.
Yeah, and I put that forward because I think it's really that placeholder, but I really want this to be a topic of discussion when this bill gets to conference, and ultimately, I think it gives us a position as the House of saying that this is important to us as well, and it's just a question of the funding that it would receive.
Okay, thank you. Sometimes my mouth speaks before my brain gets in gear, so.
I'll withdraw my roll call,
We'll,
Mr. Chair.
The roll call is withdrawed, and the chair will move an amendment to the A5 amendment to on line 1.5 to change it to a 50,000. And Mr. Walsh?
Mr. Chair, just for clarification, I would suggest amending line 1.14, strike the word amend and replace with increase. So it would read increase min-core transfer, and then after transfer and before the comma, insert $50,000 each year. So the line would read increase min-core transfer $50,000 each year, comma, agency appropriations, comma, and fund totals accordingly.
Okay, do the staff understand all 3 amendments, the original, mine, and Mr. Walsh's? And the membership, or the members here understand it? If so, you want to move your amendment as amended?
Mr. Chair, I move my amendment as amended.
All right, so it'll be the A5 amendment as amended. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Okay. Now we move on to the A8 amendment. We've got 2 amendments left here.
The A8 amendment is my amendment, Mr. Chair.
A8 amendment, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, the A8 amendment is the non-controversial freelance court reporter bill. Mr. Chair, it pretty much, all sides agree. It pretty much says you got to charge both sides the same amount of money. Okay. And so I would ask members to support it.
And I would too. And any comments? If none, Representative Hillstrom moves the A8 amendment. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, the last amendment is the A9 amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. That the A9 amendment is my amendment. Mr. Chair, this comes out of the MAPE proposal for injured employees. And when this bill was in the Health and Human Services Committee, they amended it to say that it needed to come out of existing budget resources, and everyone was fine with it. So, Mr. Chair, I'd just like our language to be consistent with saying that it's using existing budget resources. And I'd ask
Okay.
members to vote yes.
The chair would support that amendment. Any comments? Okay, on the A9 amendment, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, now we have a person that wants to testify, Dylan Workington. Can you keep it real short?
Yes.
Okay, go ahead, sir. Name your name and your title and begin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My name is Dylan Workington. I'm the Director of Anoka County Corrections, also the President of the Minnesota Association of Community Corrections Act Counties. The purpose for my request to testify today is the fact that we have not had any opportunity to address community corrections funding as of yet. And we wanted to take a few minutes of your time to, number one, say thank you to the committee for looking at increases to Community Corrections Act and also the ISR agents that are supported by the Department of Corrections as well. Throughout the testimony today, or throughout the discussion today, I should add that there's been a lot of discussion regarding elements that connect with community corrections. One of those elements is that we're on the front lines of dealing with the majority of the problems associated with sex trafficking, domestic violence, sex offender supervision and management. We deal with the supervision of many of the releasees from the Department of Corrections prison system. Our hands touch many of the 17,500 sex offenders who are registered as well. And so in looking at alternatives such as the juvenile detention alternatives and also prison bed space alternatives, community corrections is a very, very effective method of reducing costs in those areas. And so over the last number of years, actually 10 years, despite some of the increases suggested here, our corrections funding has been nearly flat. The Department of Corrections Field Services has had 30% increases at the same time that that's been mostly flat. And our counties have incurred those costs and increased at an average of about 40%. So in order to keep it moving forward, there would be a need of approximately about $20 million to reverse that trend. That's obviously not going to happen. And so our request is just to number one, say thank you for the resources provided, but also to say that we will need to look in the future as we look at alternatives to incarceration to fund community corrections and community supervision more effectively. Some opportunities exist through justice reinvestment. That's been a discussion as well. Minnesota remains the 49th lowest prison population state on the backs of community corrections in large part. We also have reduced and reversed much of the trends in juvenile crime in addition to juvenile detention alternatives. And so as we go forward, our request is brief, but that we continue to look at funding community corrections as we supervise about 75% of the state's more high-risk population. So thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, sir. We're going to take comments and then vote. I just want to make sure that you know that this isn't our last meeting, so your usual congratulations to staff and things that we do and say goodbye won't take place. We're going to have one more bill we have to hear yet, so we'll adjourn right after our vote. But now I think we got comments from anybody that wishes to about the bill as a whole. Representative Hilster.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Before I make comments on the whole bill, I wanted to make it clear that House File 1433, that's my proposal on the video recording in restrooms. Members, you have a letter from one of the victims' parents included in your packet. She was not able to come and testify when we heard that bill because the case was still pending. And so we didn't want anything that was said in the legislature to impact the criminal matter. So I wanted members to know that that letter was included in your packets, and please take a look at it.
Okay, thank you. And now, comments on the bill, members, before we vote. Seeing none. No, Representative Johnson.
Representative Cornish, I want to thank you and all the members for putting together a good bill. I think I'd like to request a roll call.
Okay, roll call has been requested.
Mr.
Seeing no comments.
Mr. Chair? Mr.
Yes.
Chair, over here, we had, you want to go first?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, thank you. Mr. Chair, I just wanted to make a final comment on the bill.
Yeah.
Mr. Chair, there are a number of provisions in the bill that all of us have worked very bipartisanly on, and in many instances, there are funding proposals for things that are many folks' priorities. I know that you got a budget target that most of us were not entirely happy with. I see the court is here. Their request was for 5 and 5. That was put forward by the court as well as by the governor, as well as many other proposals for the BCA and the Battered Women's Coalition, and many of those pieces didn't make it in the bill. And so, Mr. Chair, I know that you have placeholders in the bill, and as we move forward, I'm hoping that we have the opportunity to improve on this bill, and I hope that you continue to remain open to discussions about the pieces that concern our members. There wasn't an amendment on the scrap metal dealers bill. There weren't amendments on some of the other proposals that are a little more difficult today. But I hope going forward we will have the opportunity to attempt to work to iron out some of those other issues, Mr. Chair.
Okay, members. Thank you, DFLers over here, for your cooperation, and we'll look forward to one more meeting and then spend a lot of time on the floor. And in the 13 years that I've been here, there's been a lot worse bills than this. In deficit times, I mean, Representative Hillstrom would probably agree that we've cut into people a lot more. This one, I'm glad we didn't have to actually make cuts into the base, we're actually just into the proposed increases. So with that, the chair will move the bill, what's the number? House File 849 as amended, to be referred to Ways and Means, and Mr. Gottlieb will take the roll.
Representative Cornish?
Aye.
Representative Johnson?
Aye.
Representative Considine?
Can you come back?
Representative Dean?
No.
Representative Hertas?
Yes.
Representative Hillstrom?
Aye.
Representative Howe?
Yes.
Representative Lomer?
Yes.
Representative Lucero?
Yes.
Representative Newberger?
Yes.
Representative O'Neill? Representative Quam?
Aye.
Representative Rosenthal?
Pass.
Representative Schoen?
Aye.
Representative Ward? Representative Winkler?
Aye.
Representative Zerwas?
Yes.
Representative O'Neill?
Yes.
And Representative Considine.
No.
And Representative Rosenthal.
You all right?
15 to 2.
The vote being 15 ayes and 2 nays, the bill passes and on the way to Ways and Means. Thank you. And meeting adjourned.